distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all of you welcome. Kia ora, good evening, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Just I will start with short pray and then I will do my welcoming speech, very short. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين Amen. In the meaning, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful. All praise due to Allah, the Lord of the world, and He is the merciful of the merciful, and also He is the beneficent. He is the master of the day of judgment. Thee do we serve, and thee do we beseech for help. Keep us on the straight path. That straight path, those open whom Thou hast bestowed favor, not the path of those upon whom the wrath the brought down, nor of those who go astray. Amen. Distinguished guests, it is my great honor to have all of you here to this public talk hosted by Pearl of the Islands Foundation and also Belong Aotearoa. I would like to say warmly welcome each and every one of you, especially Professor Sophia Pandya. She is our international guest speaker from USA. And also Marlowe from the University of Auckland. He will be responded tonight. And also Mr. Abann Yor, General Manager from Aotearoa Resettled Community Coalition, and also Dr. Ruxana Aslam. Thank you very much. I also acknowledge Ms. Rokhana Sheward, CEO of Belong Aotearoa, and Najira and Marlowe. They help us to make this happen tonight. Thank you very much. I would like to also thank to our team, PIF members, making this program happen. I would like to inform you some of housekeeping rules. We have two entrances you are in. And also we have one exit at the back, and also toilets at the back also, right-hand side. Can I also request that you can put your phone, mobile, silent, please. Pearl of the Islands Foundation aims to promote dialogue, acceptance, and engagement between people of diverse background. These interfaith and intercultural spaces are important in this regard. They allow for meaningful exchanges with people we may not necessarily be familiar with. By engaging in conversation with people around us, we shatter stereotypes and attempts to understand, accept one another. With this in mind, over the past year, we have organized about 24 programs, events. This includes talk, panels, cultural days, nights, Ramadan Iftar dinner. We partner with 13 different organizations in those events. And also more than 1,400 people attended this event. It's been one of the PIF most successful years since it's established in 2006. For a more accepting, enlightened, and socially cohesive Aotearoa, New Zealand. Today, our guest speakers are going to talk about promoting social cohesion between refugees and host communities. The United Nations Refugee Agency estimates that there are more than over 70 million people who have been displaced from their home. It is the highest number in the history. Within this group, there are 4 different distinctions to the refugee umbrella that UNHCR uses. This includes refugees, internally displaced persons, asylum seekers, and stateless people. This convention is an important UN treaty that builds on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which stated that people have a right to seek asylum from persecutions. 41.3 million people around the world have been forcibly displaced, and approximately half of them women and children. It is very sad. 1 in every 113 people on earth is an asylum seeker, internally displaced, or a refugee. 25.9 million people meet the Convention's definition of refugee, someone who is persecuted for reason of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. 10 million people are stateless who have been denied a nationality and all the basic rights, education, healthcare, political participation, freedom of movement that come with it. It is, I can continue, but our guest speakers will talk about that one very soon. We will hear more from our guest speaker on this topic. I'll now invite Roxana Sheward to the floor to welcome to you on behalf of Belong Aotearoa. Please, welcome.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Roxana Sheward toko ingoa from Belong Aotearoa. And is that working? Yes, thank you. So for those who've been following us for the past year, thank you. As we've taken a bit of a shift in what we at Belong Aotearoa are focusing on. Building on the 15 years supporting thousands of newcomers, migrants and former refugees, we're committing to fostering a New Zealand where everyone can belong. And we believe that by joining hands, by doing more work collaboratively, is the only way to solve some of the root causes that prevent a successful settlement within New Zealand. So our main focus with our work is on that root cause of barriers to successful settlement, and to look at ways that we can work with communities to ensure that they enjoy and can fully participate in this beautiful new country that they can call home. It's a real honour to be co-hosting this event with Pearl of Ireland Foundation, who have a very similar purpose around social cohesion, bringing different cultures together and really caring for the well-being of our communities. And I think that we have to kind of build a momentum around that, particularly with New Zealand's population growing, increase in diverse faces that we see on the streets, on how we can build together, share our thinking, our learnings, and understand deeper to find ways to facilitate the social cohesion, what we're also here tonight to find out about more of. There's a saying, a statement I've been hearing recently, and you might have already heard me say it, so forgive me, but this for me underpins the work that we're trying to do. And that is, diversity is about having a seat at the table. Inclusion is about having a voice, but belonging is about being heard. So I'm hoping that as we travel across this year, working with new and established partners, we can really create a successful experience for everyone in Aotearoa. Thank you. I'm going to hand back to Abdul, who's going to introduce keynote speaker.
Thank you, Roxana. Our international guest speaker, Professor Sophia Pandya, is a professor and department chair at California University, State University at Long Beach, in the Department of Religious Studies. Winner of the 2016 Advancement of Women Award at CSULB. Maybe, what does it mean? Maybe she...
State Long Beach.
From the President's Commission on the Status of Women. She received her BA from UC Berkeley in Near Eastern Studies Arabic and her MA and PhD from UC Santa Barbara in Religious Studies. A Fulbright scholar, she specialized in women in Islam and more broadly in contemporary movements within Islam. Dr. Pandya has authored a book, 2012, Muslim Women and Islamic Resurgence, Religion, Education, and Identity Politics in Bahrain, on Bahraini women and the ways in which globalization and modern education impacted their religious activities. Having carried out research in Turkey on several occasions, she is also the co-editor of a second published volume, The Gülen Hizmet Movement and its Transnational Activities, Case Studies on Charitable Activism. Dr. Pandya has also published about the Hizmet movement and its relationship to the Kurdish community in Turkey, Assimilation and Identity Politics, an article about family and gender in wartime Yemen, The War Took Us Backward, Yemeni Families and Dialectical Patriarchal Reordering. She is currently working on a book on the stories of Turkish refugees and the meanings they find or construct from their ordeal. Thank you very much. Please welcome to our guest speaker.
Thank you very much, and kia ora, did I say that right? I'd like to begin by acknowledging the sponsors of this event, including the Belong Aotearoa Foundation and the Pearl of the Islands Foundation, and especially Mr. Abdul Bey and Mr. Yasser Bey and Mr. Taner Bey. Thank you very much, and everybody else that was involved in organizing this event. You're very lucky to live here. I have to say, I've been around the island for just a couple days and I'm already in love with New Zealand. But I'm going to talk about refugees and social cohesion, but my voice is not, in fact, the only voice that you're going to hear. You're going to hear the voices of the children that have given me a lot of their artwork. And so at times you might go in and out of what I'm saying and just focus on the children's artwork. I also have some voices from the refugees that I interviewed. So the talk is called Refugees and Social Cohesion. This first picture is by a little girl. She's 8 years old. Her name is Yusra. And I did interview her mother on the 2 times I was in Greece interviewing refugees in 2018, also in 2019. And so she drew this picture. Of course, she's the cutest one in the picture, right? That's her mom, Anne. That's her father, Baba, right? Baba just means father, and her brother Yasser and Ahmed. And this is before the coup that took place in Turkey. The coup took place on July 15th, 2016. And so everybody was happy. You see they're eating food. They're just having a nice time. After the coup, unfortunately, Yusra's father was arrested for his connections to the Gülen movement. The Gülen movement is also known as the Hizmet movement. And so he was arrested. The movement was, blamed for the coup. Everybody that was even casually affiliated with the movement were called terrorists. And so you see Baba there, he's in jail and he got 7 years. So everybody else is outside of the bars crying. Interestingly, Yusra drew us in jail. Do you notice that? Yeah, we're in jail with Baba. And then here she even numbered it for me 3, right? The third panel has to do with the crossing of the river. In English, or rather in Greek, it's the Evros River, but the Turks call it the Medic River. So they cross from Greece, from Turkey to the Greek side. A lot of people are still crossing in little inflatable boats. It's a treacherous river. It's actually not that doesn't take that long to cross, but there's a lot of bodies in the water because they call it the refugee cemetery, okay? So if you look closely, I know in the back it's hard to look closely, but you can see that the mother is actually smiling. She's being very strong for the other three. The other three are crying. She drew this picture in Greece last summer, and her dream was to get to Germany. Her dream, was that she would arrive there, and this is what she thinks it would look like, right? My interpretation of that fourth panel is that she's imagining the freedom and the love that she would feel in Germany, and that the family would be happy, even though they accept that Baba's not there, right? They're all smiling, but Baba's not able to join. I mean, when we think about refugees and social cohesion, I wonder if she'll be able to smile. In fact, she did make it to Germany. They did 10 attempts with a fake passport, and they finally made it out. So they're there now. And the refugee support services are fairly good in Germany, so I hope that she will realize her dream. But realizing, little children refugees' dreams takes a lot of careful planning. And today, it's something that we all need to think about. Human displacement is at a crisis level. We have never had this many displaced people ever on Earth, okay? So according to the UNHCR, it's about 70 million people are displaced, and that's about 1 out of every 108. And so you have to think about the core causes of this displacement, and perhaps that can help us understand why this is happening. We have, incredible economic inequality right now. So poverty, lots of people are very, very poor. We have a rise in autocratic governments. So you've got human rights violations all over the place. Political turmoil. When is the Syrian war going to end? What's the war in Yemen going to end? You have sectarian violence, of course, war. All of these root problems are, as of today, unaddressed. Okay, unaddressed. Nothing is better yet. So this image here, I was in Spain, in fact, with a group of refugee gentlemen, and one of them pointed to the pool with the fish in it, and he looked at the white fish and he said, "Refugee fish." He saw himself there, and that also speaks to belonging and fitting in, but it's also kind of funny, right? And he was laughing when he said it. When we think about displacement and asylum seekers, refugees, their ordeal takes place in stages. And the worst mistake to make is to think that once they arrive to relative safety, that everything's over, that they're okay, that you can just give them a job, stick them in a language class and that they'll be okay. This is not true. So crossing the river or the sea for the refugees that I interviewed was only the first stage, and it could have included, like for many refugees, armed conflict, hiding from arrest, time in prison, assault, sexual assault, torture, capture for exploitation, human trafficking, death, or witnessing the death of others. Okay, and so you see in this image by a child, the people have fallen into the sea. Right, you see on the top of the bridge, people are crossing from Turkey into Greece again. And on the Turkish side, you see she's thinking about jail. But if you look in the river, there's people that have fallen into the sea. In fact, I was asked in Turkey if I wanted to interview a father who had just lost 2 of his children and his wife, and his 3rd kid was still floating in the river. They were hoping they would be able to find him alive. And of course, they didn't find him alive. And I said, no, I didn't want to interview him. I didn't want to do it. This is another image. You see the Turkish flag and the Greek flag. When we consider social cohesion, of course, there's multitudes of challenges to social cohesion. In New Zealand, also Australia, United States. The United States in particular is not very good at taking refugees, especially right now. But after arriving to safety, a lot of the asylum seekers, refugees have to fight for, to be employed, to have a voice in the new community, to be able to advocate for their family, to forge community with others, and just to feel as though they belong. And it's more than that, just to feel as though they're a person. I mean, we should really start with that, just to feel as though they're a person, because there's a lot of identity loss when people leave their country, their families, their job, their financial situation, the entire system in which they fit. They lose that. There's identity loss. There's mental health problems. So feeling as though they belonged, that's a journey. Getting there, that's a journey. And it doesn't help that many refugees feel quite invisible. But I should point out something very important. One of my graduate assistants, research assistants, is herself a Syrian refugee. And when I began, trying to help her conceive of the project that I was carrying out with the Turkish community, she gave me lots of really good advice. And she said, look, refugees are never just refugees. Like, I don't even want you to think of me as a refugee, okay? I'm a person who just happens to be displaced. I have a complex identity. I like this kind of food. I don't like this kind of food. Don't just think of me as a refugee. I have life problems, desires, hopes. My life was impacted by this situation, but I don't want you to define me by that word refugee. And we shouldn't define refugees by their experiences as refugees. When I carried out the research, it is towards this project that Abdul Bey kindly told you about. So my larger project, has to do with the meaning that refugees construct out of trauma. So I spent those 2 summers, and it's interview-based. I did this qualitative research through participation observation methods, and also it was shaped by grounded theory, whereby you interview people and you wait to see which themes start emerging, okay? Then you draw your data from those themes that emerge. And I interviewed at least 36 people. I actually added a few more people from the States, but most of those, those 36 were in Greece. And I mean, you're not that interested, I'm sure, in my method, but that picture of shoes, has to do with the shoes that the refugees came in, and then they would sometimes leave some shoes for the next group of refugees that came. They would leave clothes and shoes behind. So it's kind of interesting for me to look at the storehouse where they had extra clothes and extra shoes for refugees. You might need a little bit of context just to understand the particular group that I covered for this project. A lot of what I'm saying about refugees applies to the refugee situation in general. But this particular group, known as the Gülen movement, that's also another term for the Hizmet movement. Hizmet just means service in Turkey. Service in Turkish. And so they got into political problems right after the coup. Actually, before the coup, about 3 years before the coup, they started to have problems with the Turkish government, but things came to a very violent head after July 15th, 2016, when the Turkish purge began. Or the word purge is an ugly word. It reminds us of Pol Pot. But that is what's happening in Turkey, not only to the Hizmet movement, but to others that the Turkish President Erdogan believes oppose him. And so that includes many in the Kurdish community, in the Alevi community, members of his own military, and then the majority of people that are held in prisons for political reasons are actually from that Hizmet Gülen movement, which he immediately blamed after July 15, 2016. And strangely, he also said that this coup was God's gift to Turkey, or something like that, which implies that he derived some benefit from the coup, and he did, because he was able to restructure the community in a way that was beneficial to him staying in power. So many members of the Hizmet movement have experienced social ostracism or shunning, okay? Shunning. They've even been told that they are not true Muslims, that they are like puppet followers of the shadowy cleric Gülen, and that they can't think for themselves. They're just sort of cult members, which justifies none of what happened to them. So even people that are tangentially related to the Hizmet movement have been fired, rejected by neighbors, sometimes by family, often reported by neighbors, sometimes by family. They've been jailed at very high numbers. and in jail torture and rape, according to Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and other human rights organizations, is happening. Okay? Again, somebody also asked me if I wanted to interview a rape victim in Greece, and I declined. She also declined, but I was sort of happy that she declined because that would have been very hard for me. So as of February 2020, Erdogan's government has arrested over 100,000 people and detained over 500,000. And one of the tactics that Erdogan's government is using has to do with targeting women. Now, broadly speaking, many of you know perhaps that political conflict actually victimizes women and children more than men. And maybe you didn't know this, because in the past, men, from one side would line up against men from the other side, and they'd shoot each other, or they'd throw stones or spears or whatever. But today, actually, women and children die at very, higher rates than men in political conflict. And women and children are used as weapons in political conflict. So in the Turkish context, there's a particularly nasty strategy that the Turkish government carries out, and that's detaining women right before or right after they give birth. Okay, so if you want to read more about that, I have my citation there. But so they detain women right before or right after they give birth. And in fact, in Turkey, I'm not sure why, but they detain the mothers with their children, of course, right after they give birth, so the woman would keep the baby. But sometimes they arrest mothers with small children, under the age of 5. So right now there's over 700 babies in jail held with their mothers. You can look at this image and see if you think it's hopeful or full of despair or both. Here are some voices from the refugees themselves that I interviewed. So Sui, that's not her real name. She's a Turkmen. She was married with 1 baby. Her husband was in jail. She was hiding. She said, "I want to say something about delivering the baby. Normally people are happy, but I was sad. I didn't want to deliver. I had no husband, no family beside me." Blut said, he's a lawyer, he said, "After the coup attempt, I always woke up at 4 a.m. wondering, when will they come? When I was hiding, my father died and I couldn't go to his funeral. One of my friends reported me, and 1 month later the police came to my house. A lawyer friend reported me. He came to my house lots of times. I helped him on lots of his own cases. He knew me, but he wanted to save himself." So prison stories. This is Yusuf, he's 30. "They beat us. They tried to get names. They hit me in the detention center, everywhere on my body. They carried out every type of torture. They zip-tied me. They didn't cover my head. Just they hit me everywhere, over 8 days, every day." He had to take a break, and he cried while he was telling me this. But he was also very proud of himself, because he said what they wanted was 10 names. And he kept thinking, if I give 10 names, those 10 people will give 10 names, and those 10, those 100 people will give 10 names. And so he kept thinking that. He kept thinking of the math, which is very brave. And so he didn't tell. He didn't tell the names. He just took the pain. So here's an image of the refugee cemetery known as Evros, or the Medic. And so this is Yesma. She's 31, married, 1 son. She said, "We took a cab to the Medic." She started crying during the interview. "When we came to the Medic, I wasn't happy. I left my family, but I felt the people who died there, whose bodies were never found. When I got to the river, I felt them." I actually was in Greece, and I tried myself to go one day to have a mental health day, right? That's why I couldn't interview certain people, because of my own mental health. So I tried to go to the beach one day, and I threw up at the beach because I was in the water, and it was after this interview. And so I got out of the water, and I'm thinking, okay, why am I so dizzy and I can't breathe, and why do I feel this, like I had a panic attack, right? And then I remembered I just interviewed somebody who told me that the bodies are in the water. And a lot of people who told me how afraid they were going to drown in the water. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking, that I could go swimming after carrying out these interviews. What's interesting to me about this picture here, or drawing, is that there's no mouth for that little girl. She doesn't have a mouth. I wish I could tell her, lots of people are seeing your picture right now. You do have, your picture is being seen by so many people. You're being heard. I wish I could tell her that. And refugees do suffer from layers and layers of invisibility. They fight for recognition, social acceptance at every level. Even in their home country, their plight is not understood or believed. In Turkey right now, the Turkish government has taken over 190 media institutions. And so many people in Turkey, they just don't know what's happening, right? At times he's cut out, he's canceled Facebook and Twitter, so people just don't know what's happening. But when they arrive to their host country, to be acknowledged as eligible for official status of refugee, to be acknowledged as a citizen, and later to be acknowledged of dignity, acceptance, and a life beyond a marginalized existence is very hard. Here you have an image of Esma Uludai. So she crossed the river with her 3 kids. And when she got to the other side, after a little bit, she had a heart attack. And I just don't want her to be forgotten. So if we could just say Esma Uludai, if we could just say that right now. Esma Uludai. I just don't want her to be invisible. So Hizmet refugees can't speak without fear of retribution. In part, that makes me feel as though I really have to do my job, because many people can't stand up and publicly speak. They can't be on camera because their family members could be hurt in the home country. This is true for many refugees. And one of the problems that adds to this invisibility of refugees is that many times, a given group like the Tibetans or the Hizmet movement or whoever it is, the Rohingya, that's only one group out of the dozens of groups that are having a really bad time right now. And we have compassion fatigue. We have eco-depression. There's just so much going on. It's hard to know where can we make a dent. How can we help? And then some people just don't try at all. There's a lack of global awareness. There's also the issue that many people think of Turkey as a haven for refugees, right? There's 3 million to 4 million refugees in Turkey right now, and I give credit to Turkey for that. However, it makes it invisible that Turkey also has, Turkish President Erdogan has also created refugees. He has pushed out tens and thousands of his own people, and many others are in jail. So what happens in this case? In any collective trauma, like what's happening to the refugees I interviewed, and any refugee really, you have feelings of stigma. Okay, people don't really like to be refugees. I had one person I interviewed, she said that after crossing, she went to the bathroom and looked at her face in the mirror, and she said, this is what a refugee looks like. And accepting that was very hard for her. And so we talked about the identity crisis that comes along with that. Just for some people, you must have Turkish friends to be here, or at least know some Turkish people. Turkishness was something of great pride for many people. And to have that ripped away, to be called a traitor to Turkey, that's also an incredible loss of identity. You can't even be Turkish anymore. And many people would tell me, I don't even accept that Muslims are good. They're Muslim. They're telling me this. They say, it doesn't matter. The Muslims in my country, many of them were not good to me. And the Greeks, the Christian Greeks, were way better. They don't even know us, and we're Turkish, for God's sake, and they accepted us with open arms. So now I don't care if somebody's a Muslim or Christian. I just want to know if they're a good person. So their entire worldview has shifted. And then feeling illegal and layers of shame. One woman told me, I want to apologize to all the Greek citizens. I feel sorry that I came here illegally. This is the only illegal thing I've ever done, and I'm so sorry that I'm here, and thank you so much for helping. You also have the idea that this is all made worse by people's perceptions of refugees. that they are pathetic, tragic figures, that they are considered, quote, matter out of place, unquote, and thus polluting, right? Flattened objects of pity. They don't have any agency or self-determination. They're just monolithic beings with a single wretched identity, like Alan Kurdi, the little kid, and, you know, flat with his little red bathing suit up in the sand. So refugee consequences include depression, anxiety, substance abuse, post-traumatic stress disorder, ruptures in their relationships at every level, segmented integration, which means that the kids often integrate quicker than the parents, which causes an inversion of the family order, where the children are seen as the grown-ups and the grown-ups are all helpless, financial stress, and the most scary thing is the diminished ability to parent well. So the most disturbing interview was not the torture victims, and some of the torture interviews that I carried out were very hard for me. You know, one guy went on for 3 hours and took me downstairs, and they put the hood on his head, and they asked him to kneel against the wall, and then I was shutting down. I felt like it was happening to me. I had to go outside, look at birds, take Advil, but that was not the worst interview. The worst interview was one in which a mother told me, she had twins, they were 2 years old. She said, I'm not interested in my children anymore. They want things, and I can't give them things. They keep asking me for toys. I don't have the money to give them toys. And then she just started crying. That was the most difficult and most disturbing interview to me. But if we stop and just feel sorry for refugees, that doesn't help anybody that much. Anthropologist Lisa Malki, she actually gives us something to think about in terms of the potential of displacement. So she argues if we merely understand displacement as a human tragedy, quote, looking no further can mean that one gains no insight at all into the lived meanings that displacement and exile can have. Edward Said also gives us more to think about in terms of the opportunities of displacement. And he says, quote, exiles cross borders. They break barriers of thought and experience. The exile status allows for, quote, originality of vision, self-awareness. Many exiles become poets, artists, novelists. Many create nostalgic works. They understand things that others can't understand. They have seen things and experienced things that others haven't. So they have the ability not to take things like home and homeland for granted. And there you have Shireen Ebadi. She says, while living in exile, I've become the loudspeaker for the people of Iran. Many of the children whose parents I interviewed told me they were interested in becoming human rights attorneys or political scientists. They kind of wanted to understand what was happening to their whole family. When we talk about, you know, the opportunities of displacement and the meanings that displaced people make out of their trauma, this shouldn't lead us to think that there's a rosy ending or some sort of happy ending, recovery, deliverance, etc. That's not what I'm wanting to imply. You can have adaptive meanings made, you can have coping mechanisms or opportunities of displacement, but we also need to understand that being displaced is absolutely a trauma. So here you have one child who drew so much going on. I mean, it takes a while to understand that image there. And the other child, I juxtaposed it with this other child's drawing of just an empty page. And I don't know if this refers to a new page in page in a book, like Hope for the Future, or if this means I don't know if I can write anything. I don't know what to say about what's happening to me. I just don't know what it means. But in both of our countries, there's a mixed reception, isn't there, for asylum seekers? There's issues. There's people that don't want to have more immigrants in both of our countries. And there's this image of good refugee versus bad refugee. So Wilson and Mavelli, they describe, this perceived difference. Those that are perceived as good refugees tend to be passive. Those that are bad refugees are active. So they write, good refugees are women, children, and male victims of violence who patiently wait in refugee camps to be rescued by British, European, Western saviors. Okay? Those are the good refugees who just wait. They sit in the boat or they sit in the camp. So-called bad refugees, quote unquote, are those that come over in swarms, right? Hordes, invasions. They use up our resources. They change our culture, and most of them are Muslims. What a threat! They're bringing their Sharia law. They're going to destroy our secularism. They're going to destroy our churches with Sharia law. And look what they do to their women. Look what they do. We don't want them here. I'm not a bigot. It's just my religion. So what do we do? So combating this type of exclusivity. I'm not a bigot. It's just my religion. How do you combat that? How do you combat those that want to maintain their status and maintain all the dominate all the resources? So the research shows that it's really best and most effective if it's top down. If the government agrees to create a culture from the top down, a culture of inclusivity. So you have top-down nation-state, multicultural, and intercultural integration frames. Intercultural means it's not enough just to tolerate the other groups around you, but to have dialogue with them, to want to interact with them. That's interculturalism. So if they have intercultural integration frames, this is key towards reducing prejudice. Not just assimilation or tolerance. Those are like, I can bear you. You're bearable to me. That's not very good. Also, the religious leaders, if they can foster and discuss and debate theologies of inclusivity, how to be inclusive, and towards social cohesion, if we can encourage state and local government commitments to multicultural and intercultural social cohesion. Also fostering long-term partnerships with businesses, ethnic and religious communities, police, medical, psychological, educational, charitable institutions, create and support language and employability programs, volunteers, if we can encourage volunteers to do things like filling out forms. Filling out forms is actually, people that help refugees fill out forms, I think they're going directly to heaven. Because this is one of the hardest things for refugees, is, they get there and then the government comes and hands them all these forms and says, you fill it out, then you can have food, or whatever it is, right? It's like, some 5-year-old is trying to fill out the form for his parents. Daycare, a lot of refugees come and they don't have access to, they've never put their children in daycare ever. And so the expectation that they suddenly, here, Mom, put your kids in this daycare and go get a job. This is very difficult. They need processing about that and explanations. And most of all, we need to raise awareness regarding displaced people. We need to make them visible. They're invisible to many people. We need to make them visible. And we need to address the root causes of their displacement. We create the community that we can imagine. We can do better. We can do better. We have to imagine what types of resources we could be providing. Mental health, childcare, form filling, educational, employment. We have to imagine this. We have to imagine that people need time with the trauma. They need time. We can imagine it. So we have to, the children can imagine. We have to imagine. They're drawing this beautiful picture. This one child drew a beautiful picture of, and she was in Greece. She's imagining that she's going to she left Turkey, getting to Greece, and then arriving to Finland. And then, this tree will grow and that it will all be fine. It's up to us. We can do this for them. We have to imagine a different society in which refugee issues are, refugees themselves, in which they can belong, and not just belong, but in which they're valued. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophia, for that wonderful talk. Now I would like to next invite Jay Marlowe, Associate Professor from the University of Auckland, to respond to that. Jay's an Associate Professor and he focuses on refugee studies and settlement futures as it relates to migration policy, role of technologies and disaster risk reduction. In 2019, he became a Rutherford Discovery Fellow to pursue a 5-year research program related to refugee settlement trajectories. As a social worker and former visiting fellow with the Refugee Studies Centre at Oxford University, he has worked with refugee communities as a practitioner and researcher, publishing more than 70 peer-reviewed papers. Please, Jay.
Can you hear me? Yep. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ko grandfather te monga, ko nui te awa, ko mewhawa te waka, ko Boone, North Carolina te wahi, ko Jay Meredith Marlowe aho. Kia ora, my name's Jay. I'm an associate professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Auckland. It's great to be here, and I'd like to thank Belong Aotearoa for welcoming me, and the Pearl of Islands Foundation as well. And thank you, Sophia, for the keynote. I think one of the things that, whilst the situation in Turkey is obviously a very different context, I think there are some things that we might be able to draw some of these relevant threads together. I think particularly around this search for belonging and safety, and this request to be heard, as Roxana referred to. What I want to make clear with this is I want to make a distinction between refugee resettlement and refugee settlement. Refugee resettlement is about protection. It's about protecting people who have well-founded fears of persecution. So the discussions about how well will they integrate, are they employable, what skills do they have, is actually irrelevant at this stage. This is about protecting people who don't have a durable solution for safety and protection. Places like New Zealand can provide that. Once that's provided, after refugee resettlement, once they've arrived, we then shift to the experience of settlement. And to me, settlement is about the experience of belonging. And if we're going to be talking about that, there's a difference between presence and participation, and a difference between an invite and a welcome. So we're supposed to be talking about social cohesion, but I think we have very little understanding of what that is and who we should maybe even be cohering to. And I'll try to come around to that in a few different ways, but Jira was kind enough to give me 3 very simple questions to address, which is, what is the role of the host community, what can the government do about it, and what can we do as individuals? And everyone lives happily ever after. So I think one of the things around that's deeply embedded in the New Zealand society, if we think about the host community, I think that's deeply embedded in New Zealand, is this notion of the fair go. And but I think in order for us to do that, we need to turn the mirror on ourselves, all of us, to think about what are our assumptions. And when we hear this word refugee, and to think about, what are some of the ideas around Manaki Tanga that might sort of inform what a fair go might actually entail. So when I was down in Christchurch back in 2012, looking to hire someone from refugee background to do some research around the impacts of the earthquakes, I had a woman apply who spoke 5 different languages. She had a PhD, and she said it was the first job she'd been shortlisted for out of 100. So this doesn't speak about someone who doesn't want to work. This is about how willing is, an invite versus a welcome. Yes, you can come to New Zealand, but are you actually welcome here? Can you participate as a peer in civil society? And this is important. I think it just, it's part of our role as in an international community about trying to respond to this global crisis. But it also makes sense on many different levels. And I think that this is important to understand in an election year where it's probably the economic argument that's going to hold the most water. But even the economic argument actually does hold water. This morning in The Australian was a story about a small town in northern Victoria that's 230 Karen refugees that were settled there have kind of revitalized this town, worth $105 million. There's research of economists out of Europe that suggests that investing €1 in refugees yields €2 in return within 5 years. But what's central to that calculus is that they are afforded the welcome. The University of Auckland is now collecting data on students who identify as coming from a refugee background. It's almost 2% of our university. They are punching well above their weight in terms of per capita number. If you look at the number of refugees per population, they're the ones that are actually getting upskilled they'll be taking care of New Zealand in the future. I also think that the host community, if we think about turning the mirror on ourselves, we have to think about the ways that we understand them. And I've argued through previous research that it's often done through a trauma-dominated lens. And I think trauma is something that's really important to recognize, but in many ways, we need to shift that focus. It's probably true that by virtue of being a refugee, you've experienced some form of trauma, but that does not mean you're a traumatized person. And so, because if that's the label that gets associated with that, do employers want to hire traumatized people? Do we want to meet it kind of stigmatizes this experience. In my experience working as a social worker, when I used to work with people from refugee backgrounds, I actually learned that I didn't even have to go to the trauma story to actually understand where they found their forms of resilience. And actually, if I wanted to understand what trauma is, in many cases for them, it wasn't the experience of escaping across Sudan or Syria or Colombia or whatever it was. It was actually when they came to places like New Zealand, where they opened themselves up to the hope that things might be different, and it didn't turn out to be that way. That was trauma. And once those things were addressed, all those previous trauma stories that they had the skills and knowledges. Their community knows how to heal. They're not tabula rasa. They're not a blank slate. But it's everyday inequality, everyday racism that actually inhibits them from accessing those tools. That was my first question. Secondly, the government. I think one of the things that we've started to see is a real shift, and that we started to understand people from refugee backgrounds as being from at risk to a risk. And this sort of poisons the discourse where suddenly we're afraid to resettle them, even though there isn't really evidence to actually suggest that. But yet it's powerful electoral politics. And really, maybe we should think about shifting it from not only trying to shift it back to at risk, but then what if we were to shift it from thinking of people from refugee backgrounds as not only from at risk to a risk, to possibly to an opportunity. And if that was the case, what needs to happen is, we have to ensure community consultation. And we've got some new refugee settlement sites that are going live. How well that consultation went is up for debate, maybe a conversation for later. It requires thinking intersectionally. Oftentimes we think about refugees as ethnic location or possibly gender. We need to think about age, migration status, time settled, a range of different factors. From that, you need to work collaboratively, and then, of course, to resource those services and opportunities accordingly. I also think that, I was talking with Najir earlier even about Bangladesh, and that even moderate rises in sea level will actually displace. When we're talking about 70 million forced migrants, this will pale in comparison in the decades to come. We need to increasingly connect the dots between climate and conflict. Even the civil war in Syria was preceded by a major drought in the Fertile Crescent. Civil wars in Somalia tell similar stories. These things are not isolated from one another. New Zealand needs to be at the forefront of that. And finally, I think one thing that the government needs to do better, and I think this speaks to the realities of refugee settlement nationally, and it's reflected in multiple projects that I've been involved. Most recently, a national survey where I hired predominantly 15 people from refugee backgrounds across New Zealand to see how people were using social media in New Zealand. And it is really clear that social media for many is actually central to their sense of well-being. And yet we think about refugee settlement policy as something that is neatly bound and occurs within national borders. We need to think about its transnational implications, where we can support people that are displaced, where they can connect and bridge this distance between here and there. For many people, if they know that they can be connected to the people there, that means that they can also belong here. And finally, the individual level. To me, belonging, I'm really interested in how people define belonging. I actually wrote a book on it, and I still don't really know myself. But that might be because I got a puppy just yesterday. I've been awake since 2 in the morning. But to me, integration is all these different elements around housing, language, work, health, education, language acquisition. What belonging is these little invisible vibrating threads that connect all those things together. And that's kind of the stuff that everyone's part of, that connects people to these various different opportunities. So it is about getting to know the people around us, whether that's at school, at work, within the community. You know, language matters. Abann's given me a really hard time about using the word refugee background. And I've got my reasons for that, and I'd be happy to discuss that. But language does matter, right? You know, I should be using that word refugee background is an interesting discussion. I think our assumptions matter. Again, 1 minute, great, is to think about, you know, again, when we hear that word refugee, what sort of images and words come to mind? And to critically imagine that. You know, these things sometimes can be hard to think, but they're also good to think. That we need to mobilize our capital. That, you know, this idea that sort of, when we connect to people that are like us, that helps us to get by. But also sometimes the power of weak ties that connects us to new information, new resources. It's called like the sociological WD-40. It helps people to get ahead. And with that, to also, you know, to mobilize our political capital and to engage with people that make important decisions. It's an election year. Make your voice heard.
Yeah.
And I guess with that, just to conclude, before Nadira kicks me off, is that, you know, I think one of the things, you know, there's an American writer, Henry Thoreau, and he has this quote, which is, "If you build your castles in the sky, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations under them." So imagine how these things might be better. Imagine what belonging might look like. What do those invisible threads look like connected to all those different domains? And yes, that's something in the sky, but that's where it should be, right? Now the work is to put the foundations so they can be realized. Kia ora.
Thanks, Jay. Sorry, just the background. Hi, everyone. It's thanks, Jay, for your speech. I took lots of notes in the background. And it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Abann Yor. He wears many hats, so many of you know him, and speaks also many languages. It's English, of course, one of them, as well as Arabic and Shilluk. And he is a community advocate, an author, an educator, and of course the general manager of Aotearoa Resettled Community Coalition. He's a strategic, visionary change maker, and he's driven by humanitarian values and an approach, and it's my pleasure to welcome him. And I've got like a long list I'm trying to remember. He's a fellow of Winston Churchill Memorial Trust. He won New Zealander of the Year, I think in 2016. And he's also represented New Zealand's resettlement communities at the Geneva Annual Tripartite Consultation about resettlement. So please welcome Abann Yor.
I think that will do my speaking, is it?
That's pretty good.
Nahami nui tina kato, tina kato, tina kato kato. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Abann Yor. That's it, the name has been given to New Zealand. I'm the general manager to Aotearoa Resettled Community Coalition. Just before I go to my reflection, I've been given opportunity to reflect on Professor Sophia and also Dr. J. But I would like to really reflect to say it will be hard if I will be in one roof for Dr. J as a speaker, because he took in all what I tried to say. And he left me without saying anything. First of all, I would like to acknowledge to say thank you for all of you being here and leaving the commitment behind, and thank you for the organizers. My reflection is really, today the context is international context, not just about New Zealand. But when we talk about refugees, social cohesion, given the background where I come from, I left my country when I was 13 years old. I've been in displaced 14 years. I've been in asylum in Middle East, Syria for 5 years, and I've been in New Zealand for 15 years. This is just my journey short. In the context of New Zealand policies, I think it will be important that we need to distinguish or to define some things in order for us to do it right. As Dr. J mentioned about the languages matter, it's not just only in the context of New Zealand, it's a context of my country of origin. Because culture, sometimes there are two cultures. There is a visible culture and invisible culture. In the situation of the refugees, first of all, if I need to define it in my own view, is someone who don't have a voice, someone who don't have a country, someone always rely to someone to help them out. This is the refugees. And those refugees who will be in the second country of asylum. And we consider New Zealand is a resettlement country, it's not a refugees country. When we receive refugees overseas, we have been given the mandate, you're losing your refugees status and we're giving you a permanent resident. Which is mean we receive them as refugees and we make them as New Zealanders. That's as simple as that. And I have just gathered some of the definitions, what social cohesion really means in the context of Western society. I have the countries which is in a high regard of the good reputation in the world. I have Canada, I have France, I have New Zealand, Australia, Denmark, and European Union. And those definitions, I have the resource from the Canada government in 1999. What really they say in all those 6 different dimensions internationally, the social cohesion is means the sense of belonging of the community and the relationship among members, the community itself. From our context as a New Zealand, belonging, what does that mean? I always recall when we have elections every 3 years, this is where I see myself as a New Zealander. When I involved inviting community by the service providers to tell community what their right is to exercise the democracy of New Zealand, that is where I've been identified as a New Zealander. Why? Because I have a voice to go and vote. That's the time, the only time I see myself, I'm a New Zealander. The rest of other years, I'm a refugee. And to tell you the truth, Dr. J mentioned the resettlement is about protection and safety, but I need to add more to it. Because that is how I come out from that. The trauma people talk about it associated with the refugee journey. People call it refugee journey, but I call it resettlement journey. Because my journey starts from my country of origin, South Sudan, and I end up in New Zealand. So this is where my destination is. But what I'm trying to say here, resettlement is about healing. It's not just about healing. How did I heal myself? Because if you are considering myself as a refugee standing before you, I heal myself because I open up. I speak. I advocate on myself. And that allows me to advocate on behalf of other people who don't have a voice. But the healing process, that's the most important element. We New Zealanders, we need to take that approach. The healing process where someone knows that I have a place to call home. When they come to the market, they go to school, They need to see themselves as part of the society. They need to be valued by those people around them. I often argue with some of the service providers. Lately, we have a community consultation. We have 4 consultations with different voices. Young people, women, elders, men. The Immigration New Zealand asked a question. What makes you to say, I love New Zealand? What makes you to feel you belong to New Zealand? And actually, I took the opportunity to reach many people as I can in order to capture those voices. With all those conversations, 4 things come up. We need New Zealand to listen. Because where we come from, we have the knowledge we brought with us. We have the culture we brought with us. And we're trying to express it when we have the opportunity. We need services to listen to us and understand where we're coming from. They need them to recognize us as just a human. We need them to resource us in order for us to stand in our leg. Because we are here to rebuild our life. We lost enough. But what we're looking for, we're looking for New Zealanders. And by the way, we are a lucky nation. We have the concept of the Maori, Manakitanga. Harua, where is it? Caring, where is it? Sharing, where is it? Can we ask ourselves as a New Zealanders? It doesn't matter what is your background is, but New Zealand as a country will bring us all together. Can we do what we're supposed to do and do right? It's not just feeling sorry for those people. So we have a role to play, each and every individual of us. Your voice, or whatever you do in life, is count. If we're looking forward to see ourselves proud of this country, as I am proud of. Let us try our best to define what we're really talking about here in international context when it comes to a social cohesion. What it means to us is between host society. When we talk about host society, it's we in this room. When we talk about the refugees, there are refugees in this room. Because those are target audience, we want to talk to them so that they can listen to what we say. How many refugees in this room? You see? Because those are target audience for them to understand how to connect with other New Zealanders. As a whole society, you're sitting here. What is really you're going to get out from this talk? Are we going to be carried on with our being applied, or we need to challenge ourselves to do something? Let us challenge ourselves. And I love this country like anyone else, because that's the only country in the world who give me opportunity. And I need to take that opportunity to give back to New Zealand. As Dr. J mentioned before, we've been working in where we are working today for 9 years doing a voluntary work. It's not because we don't want to rebuild our life, but there are people outside there even that can't help themselves. And I am sure what we find out from our consultation, there is a big gap between New Zealand public and government. What's in a resettlement, many New Zealanders, they don't understand what resettlement means. But to cut it off, this is the code that come out from the consultation with the community. Before you judge us, hear from us. Don't listen about us. And that is really very important. So now, listenings, understandings, recognizing, and resourcing them, that's the most important element of the value, how we help those people who come to this country to settle. And thank you so much.
Thank you to all the speakers. Can we just have a round of applause, please, for all of them? We're a self-managing group. They managed to sit down. Thank you very much. So we've got, this is our Q&A time. And I don't know, for me, this morning I woke up, I had a very full weekend, and I woke up and I thought, how on earth am I going to get through to tonight? All I want to do is go back to sleep. And yet I knew I'm sitting here and just listening to the presentation, listening to the talk, it really stimulates my mind, and I sort of feel like I've come more awake now. So thank you for that. I hope it's done something similar for you, and that you're got some questions. We have about 10 minutes for some questions. Yes.
I've got a mic.
Thank you. Yeah. And maybe just state your name. And if it's particularly for one panel member, or that's okay, then I'll share the questions.
Good evening, my name's Josh. A question first for Abann. How can the New Zealand public listen to someone or to a group of people that struggle to find a voice?
Can you repeat the question again?
How does the New Zealand public listen to a group that struggles to find a voice?
Thank you so much for the question. I think that's one of the thing we want to figure out for many years, and now we are in a better place to access some of the resources where we can team up with the media or organizations who can take it further. Because this is one of the things we say that we can't do it ourselves. We need other genuine New Zealanders to join us, because this is not our own work. It's all New Zealanders that are in it. So we are looking forward to involve media company with us. I think around May, and then that will be public.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give you this.
Oh, okay. Kia ora. My name's Rhonda. Just going on from that, we're talking about people feeling heard. With the next step from that being what they're saying is actually being acted on. So how important is that, and how far away are we from that?
Do you want one of you to go first?
I mean, I can say something brief, but obviously I'm not from New Zealand. But in terms of what people can do, Dr. J, I don't know your last name, I'm sorry. I've been calling you Dr. J. I mean, he pointed out that we can vote. I really, it's important to realize that we have much more power than we think we do. Okay, my students say, the Amazon is burning and Australia is burning, and they get really apathetic sometimes because they feel overwhelmed. And this is an incredibly dangerous situation. We have to remind them not to get overwhelmed, to go out and vote right there in our context. Congress people, be politically active, show up for the demonstration. It's much more powerful than we think it is. It really is. I also like the Canadian model, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. That's when a sponsor family kind of wraps themselves around a refugee family and helps them. I mean, I think this helps the group do the intercultural journey that, on both sides. It helps very much. And I've heard that you tried it out last year with some good results. And I wish that we would do it in the United States.
I mean, I guess my response is, number one, if we even go back to your comment, Josh, I actually think that, and then it's Rhonda, right? Is that I actually think that that people from refugee backgrounds do have a voice. I've asked them in many studies. I did, think about my PhD. Like I asked, what is trauma, and they told me what trauma is, and I said, well, what do you think would help? And without exception, people just started rattling off ideas around things that would help them. It's not like they didn't have a lack of ideas. So it's not that they don't have a voice, it's just that they're not being heard. And so to me, then the issue is I was struck by Abann's comment which you said, how many people in here are from refugee backgrounds? And I was sitting in the front, I don't know. But, I actually think that this is something that we're all in this together. And the reality is that if we were to look at the global map around where refugees are coming from, back in 2011, Syria wasn't even in the top 40. It was seen as a model country, very stable, and yet things fell apart very quickly. There's nothing to say that this couldn't happen in New Zealand. It just takes one crazy government, and things can turn around very quickly. And so it's about all of us working together. For me, like using my privilege, there was someone that I knew that was about to be deported, and I was able to write a letter, and because I've got a PhD next to my name, for whatever reason, suddenly that carries more weight. So it's about us using that's why I said mobilize our capital. What is your capital, and use it, make good use of it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you all.
exactly.
Have we got a couple? I'll go to Hatch. Oh, okay. I'll go to Neil over there first. Thanks.
Is that on? Yes. Firstly, kia ora me tēnā koutou katoa and arauho mai mo te kōrero I tēnei pō. Thank you, welcome, and thank you for the discussion this evening. It's been confronting, to say the least. In my role, I get to mix with lots of people from different nations, refugees, immigrants, people that have just, like myself, who have chosen to live in New Zealand. I come from Australia. I know it is incredibly hard to be a refugee in Australia and to resettle in Australia, and I hope that never happens here. It's one of the reasons I'm here. The thing that always surprises me is the congregation and segregation that refugees often find themselves in the position of, so that they mix, and this isn't a negative at all, but just by circumstance, they mix with language of culture groups, they mix with culture groups and people that they know who understand them. And I'm wondering how that can be broken down, not only from an individual level, but from a collective level as well. I have friends who are Kurdish. I understand their culture, they understand my culture, and in terms of manakitanga, we share our cultures together depending on where we meet and how that works. So that seems to me to be a really big barrier to break down, where we have ghettoized subgroups, especially out in South Auckland. So, does that make sense? I'm not sure if that makes particular sense, but just something that I've pondered on quite a lot.
Okay, I can respond to that. Firstly, you need to have better understanding, because those where they come from, they leave their country of origin because they're looking for safety. They come to the country of asylum for safety, but they didn't find that safety. What they have found, human violation, they don't have a voice, they don't have even to access the normal basic human right. They not access that. So what has happened, many of them, they end up in a refugee camp or urban society. While they are waiting for the resettlement, then based on their experience where they are, when they arrive in New Zealand, for example, because you're talking about South Auckland, they have hope that New Zealand will give them what they were looking for all those years. Then suddenly they find themselves, they can't find a job, the language problem, no closer family to them, and most importantly, the children, they become parents and parents become the children. Just you think about that, someone who fell in this society who don't have where he belongs. Because what's happened, human nature, you want to have a comfort where you can just fit in. So the other culture is not require qualification. It's require them to come, just come. You know English, you don't know English, you are welcome. That is one of the things that you see some of the people, they end up in that particular group.
I suppose my point was that I was, how do we collectively move towards a situation where we're enabling and empowering people who have come here as refugees to be able to be to have that interaction. So it wasn't any kind of slur on people living in that
Yeah,
space.
I think some of the presentation that Sophia gave around actually what's the price, because I'm a grassroots up kind of person, yeah? That's always been my construct. And hearing that perhaps it's top down, it's got to be both, you know? We, 10 minutes fly by. Do we have any leeway, time makers?
One more question.
Maybe one more question.
Hatch had her hand up, but I know there's some over there. So if it's a short question, I'll be told off by the staff later and we'll go for it. So sorry, it was actually Hatch, she had it up before.
There you are.
Oh, no.
Thank you. I have a question with Dr. J. Thank you very much. I was very happy to hear that you distinguished the resettlement and settlement process. Before coming to New Zealand, I associated with refugee work for many years in refugee camps as well, as a resettlement officer. Also, living in a refugee camp, we prepared refugees for the resettlement. Now, I would like to ask you, what is the best way to actually give the assumption, change the assumption for the refugees? Because when I talk to people, what do you think about the refugees? And then I actually ask them to write one word in post-it, very negative. But as you mentioned, it should be positive. And how can we do that? I think that children can perhaps absorb during their education. Do you have any suggestions?
Can we, to keep it short, could we take one suggestion from each of you?
I certainly have a longer answer that I'm not able to give. But I think probably a very short answer is that we need to get much better in our messaging around breaking down some of these assumptions about refugees. They're very powerful archetypes, and I think that the anti-immigration sort of right-wing type politics that we're seeing on the ascendancy in many places has a very simple and compelling message, and if we don't find ways to counter that, it's going to be an uphill battle.
In Greece, I talked to a professor, and he told me, a Greek professor, right? He told me that there's a Greek word for refugee that also means God, and that they believe that people that are coming into Greece for refuge are there's this historical meaning that means that they're deities, and if somehow we could reframe the whole notion of a person seeking haven in our communities as somebody special who can give us some new insight, this would be very helpful. But I don't know if even the Greeks don't always mean God when they say refugee, so it's an uphill battle, really. Do you want to say something about that?
You need to change your mindset. Just come to AICC.
I'm going to, we hadn't heard from this room, and I know there's Jade and Marietta. I'm just wondering if you've got a similar question that we can combine. But let's. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Marietta, just very quickly, it'll be like a sprint along the.
A question to Jay. I was affected by the notion of moving from at risk to no risk, or to at risk. And some of the right-wing politics is really scaring the living daylights out of me. And I was wondering, we can have many of these conversations over many years, but how do we know whether we're having any impact? How do we know and measure whether we're shifting the dial?
Yeah, I think that's a really critical question. And I actually think that you're the wrong people I should be talking to, because actually most of you are probably within my network, So back in 2016, you would have looked at my Facebook page, my feed. I never would have guessed in a million years Donald Trump would have been elected, but that was the reality, right? And so we exist in these echo chambers that basically we're friends with the friends that we have on Facebook. Our Twitter handles are populated by people that share the same values as us, similar points of view, which means that important debate and conversations are just not even happening. So one of the things that I'm looking to do with this Rutherford Discovery Fellowship that I've got is I'm looking to try to map these networks. And what you actually find is that, generally speaking, we'd be this little network. There's another network probably across the street that's probably talking about things that we are not very happy about, right? And probably most of us don't overlap. But it might be that someone in here, maybe Jade, or I don't know, probably not Jade, but someone in here is connected to that group, or at least has some forms of trust. And that can actually be your bridge where they might be tweeting about the right-wing stuff and then something else. And if you can identify who those players are, and there's now tools that you can do that, that's your point of intervention to actually disrupt those echo chambers.
Just to clarify, definitely not a Donald Trump fan.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you very much. Can we have a big round of applause for the speakers, please? I wasn't sure if we were. Oh, we do not. Okay, slight change of agenda. Okay. Do you mind taking your seat, and then we've got a final closing remarks.
So, kia ora, assalamu alaikum, final, but by no means least we have Pakistani-born Kiwi Muslim and journalist turned academic with more than 25 years of experience behind her. She has a doctorate on the role of media in conflict with focus on integrating peace journalism in the curriculum from the AUT University. She is a recipient of Asia New Zealand Foundation's Asia Journalism Fellowship Award. Sorry, just get my screen back up. So much accolades here. So she conducts independent training projects on peace journalism in New Zealand and internationally, and she publishes widely. Currently, Roxana is writing a book based on Pakistani youth 10 years on from after they survived suicide bombings in their schools and in their colleges. She engages in community projects related to public welfare and education. It's my absolute pleasure to invite Dr. Roxana Aslam to do the closing remarks for tonight. Thank you.
Good evening. Peace greetings to you all. Can you hear me, everybody? Yeah. And as I always do, I begin with the prayer that may the knowledge that has been shared today be used for the good of mankind. Let me start by saying a sincere thanks to the speakers today. Sophia, Jay, Abann, wonderful words. Thank you for sharing them with us. Your words not only tell the stories of the refugees you have worked with, they also give us an insight into their lives as people, their struggle, their resilience, and their fortitude. You're also right in your assessment that most of the time refugees are put under the same umbrella as the immigrants. The host communities generally look at the sharing of resources, but not the contribution that the immigrants make in different fields of life. They need to be reminded of this fact, and getting to know the refugees as valuable members of our communities is the first step towards attaining social cohesion, something we are talking about today. But what struck me today here is the coming together of two things: creativity and context. And I refer to some of the paintings that you have shown in your presentation and the context that you have given in the light of them. In my opinion, they're integral to gain a balanced perspective of any situation, especially those related to people in conflicts and crisis. It is the beginning of critical thinking, because without critical thinking, there can be no answers. Social cohesion is a beautiful concept, but a very complex phenomenon. It is a desirable goal, but oh my God, it is so elusive to attain. Lack of cohesion disintegrates a society into chaos and disorder. It is often described as a tapestry with intricate patterns. If the threads are strong and colorful, the tapestry is beautiful, durable, and valuable. But if they are weak, it is neither of these things. Indeed. But what weaves this tapestry is creativity. Creativity is the direct opposite of disorder and chaos. It is the antithesis of violence. And since times old, it has been especially effective in telling stories in the form of folklore, fairy tales, ballads, novels, theater, and films. Creativity goes hand in hand with storytelling. And when it works within the paradigm of history, context, and critical thinking, it touches people and it touches their heart. It changes their perceptions and it changes their behavior. It heals when it reveals. Which is why many academics and journalists have turned towards other means to tell their stories in a more creative manner. I wish I had the time and I could tell you about this Nepali journalist who told the stories of his horrors of war. He was a BBC parachute journalist, and he couldn't handle the horrors of war in his own country when he was sent to report on that. And then he mounted an exhibition of photographs to tell the stories of his own people. One of the pioneers of peace journalism, Jake Lynch, he wrote a novel. He's the director of the conflict studies in the University of Sydney, and he is writing a fiction novel just to tell it through a different paradigm. Afghani journalist Sarwari was tired of hearing people talking about Afghanistan in terms of death and horror all the time. So he started telling about the beauty of Afghanistan through his website. And I, an academic and a journalist, am writing a novel to tell the stories of those Pakistani boys and girls who survived the numerous suicide bombings in their schools and colleges. So what am I saying here is that while we are talking about social cohesion, which aims to build unity among diversity, it needs creativity. It needs understanding, skills, ethics, and the sensitive attitude. It needs imagination and critical thinking. And that is why it is important for the like-minded people to come together and work together, starting from their own desk. I've said it last time, and I said it again. I'll say it again. We need a fellowship of thinkers. We in New Zealand are lucky that the guiding principles towards social cohesion already exist in the form of Treaty of Waitangi. The principles of partnership, protection, and participation that our speakers talk about today are as valid today as they were at the time when they were being written, perhaps more. But they cannot be implemented or cannot be made effective without finding the common grounds between the people and the communities. And as I often say, without connecting them. So how do you connect them? You need creativity. You need critical thinking, and you need imagination. We must also remember that social cohesion is not a static state, but a dynamic process. It therefore cannot have a single solution. In most of the cases that I have come across, solutions or the answers to the people's problem lie with them. They just need to be engaged in dialogue, and they just need to be encouraged to share their vision. It is up to the organizations like PIF, the Pearl of Islands, and Belong Aotearoa to find creative forums and platforms to do so. So as I thank you both for organizing today's events, I also would urge you to find more creative ways to bring people together and connect them to a shared vision. Perhaps there is a refugee out there with more paintings, with a novel, or with more stories to tell. Thank you, please.
Once again, thank you everyone for coming. We do have some gifts for our speakers tonight. If I can invite Rokana to give a gift for our keynote speaker. It's a Māori panel art. When you open it, you'll discover and the meaning behind it. I wanted to gift wrap it, so if you want to open it, you can. If you don't want to, then it could remain as is.
Should I open it?
Yeah.
I feel bad because the wrapping is so beautiful. Well, here I go. Okay, let's see. Got it? Almost.
It's a parcel.
Oh, you really made this easy for me? Okay.
Another record.
They're going to make it work. There we are. Here we go. Almost there. Okay.
Yes, it is.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's really beautiful.
I think it refers to that you're going to persevere in life and you're going to kind of go through your challenges. I hope that's the right meaning. Yeah.
She persevered?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a context behind that.
Cool.
Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful.
To describe an art form is, yeah. I need my other glasses. Yeah,
Yes,
thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And we have some more traditional Turkish gifts. That was a Maori gift for our international speaker.
Yeah, I
and
love
because
it.
our staff is Turkish, we have some Turkish gifts for our other 3 remaining speakers. Can I invite Abdul to give this gift to Jay, please?
Jay, please. I can open it. It's
Great.
That's a ceramic handmade plates from Turkey. Can I have Abann here to receive your gift?
Please. This is my tulips.
You're gonna do it again and again, eh?
Can I invite and Dr. Rosanna, please receive your gift as well.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you to all our speakers for coming here and putting aside some time to share your thoughts and experiences and research into the topic, and to all our lovely guests for listening and sitting through for 2 hours. I hope you all learned something useful and can take it home with you and apply it to your daily lives. On behalf of Total Lions Foundation and Belong Aotearoa, I'd like to wish you all a good night.